what I mean?
Well, I just would like to cover three small subjects very briefly. I'll start with first AGM that ever existed, and there is the Writtle Hut, as illustrated by Norman Jackson. And there is a sort of thing that Tony liked, which is a gas-driven thermopile, which then provided enough electricity to run a small radio at the bottom. And in this bulletin, volume 2, number 1, you can see that it has been hand typed, and it's a ribbon typewriter.
An old-fashioned ribbon typewriter.
It's a ribbon typewriter which Tony manipulated, and then he roneoed the copies and put them in the post. We had no illustrations other than Norman's wonderful drawings, and this is so different to the wonderful, wonderful bulletin that was eventually created and that we all know and love today. But it had its own charm. It had its own charm. On that original AGM, the members are listed here. And the chairman and bulletin editor was Tony. I was vice chairman and general secretary. Jonathan Hill, who can't be here today, was membership secretary. And David Brodie, the overseas representative that Tony mentioned, was here. Roger Snelling, and finishing with Ian Higginbottom. I made a point of going and seeing Ian because I was sure that some of you would know him. Ian, unfortunately, we used to have lunch, some of us, with him in Ealing, where a small coterie of wireless enthusiasts lived. I don't live in Ealing, but I'm not that far away. And one day, Ian left the curry house where we used to have our curry buffet on Sundays, and he tripped because he thought the pavement was somewhere and it wasn't quite there, and he fell heavily, banged his head a bit, and by a miracle, a doctor walked out of a nearby pharmacist and helped him up. And Ian said, no, I'm perfectly all right, don't worry about it. And the doctor said, well, that's perhaps correct, but I want to take you to Ealing General Hospital because you banged your head, and I want to make sure. What was found was that Ian had a brain tumour of the inner ear, where the ear connects to the brain. And he had to have an operation to have it removed. I think he was lucky to survive it, but he survived it. After which he realized he couldn't drive his car anymore because some aspects of coordination were clearly missing. And he remained active nevertheless and could walk well enough. But as time went by, the coordination and balance that the inner ear provides left him. And that means that he is now alive but completely, unfortunately, infirm. He would love to be here, but he can't be. What I'm doing is passing his message to you, commemorating this event. The other thing I want to mention is that this is 40 years ago, exactly. By an extraordinary, perhaps coincidence, 100 years ago exactly, a Marconi engineer, Charles Prince, who had been dragged out of the Marconi research laboratories by the MOD and taken into the Royal Flying Corps to develop radio for aeroplanes, which would give us a strategic advantage in the war. And indeed, he succeeded in doing that, to the extent that the Royal Flying Corps had ground communications from aeroplanes before the Germans. And the Germans, there is written record in the National Archives of the German attempts to shoot down an aeroplane in order not just to down the aeroplane, but to learn the secrets of the communications device that was on board. I'm not sure whether they ever succeeded in that, but Charles Prince's original designs, which were spark transmitters, turned into radio transmitters very quickly, and he had recruited from university Eckersley, who of course was to be the first chief engineer of the BBC. And Eckersley described how he stood next to him, that is, next to Prince, when an aeroplane flew by testing whether it was going to work. And Prince said into his microphone, "Hello, Freddie. If you can hear me and reply, this will be the first radio communications from an aeroplane to the ground in the world. If you hear me, dip your wing." It dipped. I have brought today one of the earliest designs of a spark transmitter. Of course, that was airborne telegraphy, but nevertheless flying in something like a Sopwith Camel, and it is on display downstairs 100 years ago exactly, to put alongside the 40 years ago that this event commemorates. So have a look at that, because it's a unique item, and I found it out of a most extraordinary happening. Once upon a time, the GPO used to connect the various sorting offices in London with an underground railway. Many of you know this. And that underground railway, of course, has a lot of tunnels. And those tunnels were regarded as safekeeping from bombs and potential hazard. And an original example of an airborne spark transmitter in perfect condition turned up in those tunnels at the time that the GPO decided that it wouldn't any longer run these little trains underground and closed the system. So there was an open day when people were allowed to look at it all. I mean, not walk along the lines, but have a look to see before it all disappeared. And to the Post Office Department's amazement, because they never realized it themselves, tucked away out of sight in the dark, there were some strange items. And one of those was a spark transmitter for aeroplanes of the design produced by Marconi and then made by other companies to the same pattern. And I wasn't in that crowd, but somebody I sort of knew bought it. In fact, I don't think he did buy it. I don't think the post office were interested. They just wanted the stuff taken away. So I bought it from him for almost nothing. And in one of the BVWS bulletins, a little bit later than this one, of course, I have described it fully. And Mike, it's probably in the first 20 years of the BVWS disc. Yes. But do have a look at it, because it's a historically important device from 100 years ago. So once again, thank you all very much. This is a wonderful occasion. Ian tells me he'd love to be here but can't make it. Thank you.